Well, here we are in week 3, and I'm introducing the idea of theological method. At first blush, it sounds like a rather long word to be connecting to the practice of ministerial leadership, but I believe it's very important. Let's see if I can make a case for it. The practice of ministry generally is a response to something that has happened. Some crisis has occurred, some opportunity to speak has happened, some opportunity to bear witness to the truth of the gospel, either with word or deed, presents itself. The critical thing is, before we speak or act or do, have we taken the time to accurately diagnose what really has happened so that our response is faithful and true? Hence, the need for a theological method, a process by which we diagnose what is happening and what is going on. It's not unlike what doctors do. When a patient comes in to see a medical doctor, some questions are asked, some probing takes place, a little examination occurs so that the doctor is able to make a fruitful and helpful diagnosis. Theological method is sort of the same thing. In fact, most of you have already been introduced to Richard Osmer's book, Practical Theology, an Introduction. Osmer says that there are some basic questions that we ask that give rise to practical theology. You remember those 4? I'll remind us all here real quick. The first question Osmer suggests is, what is happening? The descriptive question, being able to describe what is happening. It's what you've done by writing a case study. You've given an example of one episode where something has happened, and you're giving that to us. Secondly is the question of why. Why is this happening? That deepens and thickens our analysis. Why are these factors happening? Is it because of social factors? Is there some poor theology that's going on? Is it circumstance? What's happening that creates this particular dilemma? The why question. The third question that Osmer raises is the what ought to be happening. That normative question draws us back into Scripture, into the tradition, and to the theological resources that we have as a Christian people that help us understand and to reflect on what might be the ideal. What do we need to be leaning into? What do we work for and hope for? And then the fourth question that Osmer raised in his book is how do we respond? What's the action? What action do we take? That's a fourfold movement of method, of an approach, of the practice of ministry. And ministers do that every day. They may not stop and think about it, but good ministers are engaging in that sort of methodological approach that asks what's happening, why is it happening, what ought to be happening, and then how do we respond? So in this week, I'm going to have you read a chapter from another author by the name of Laurie Green. Laurie has done a lot of work in third world environments, asking questions about contextual theology. By the way, to say that is simply to say that all theology is practical or contextual. That is to say, it comes out of some real live context, some real live quagmire or question or dilemma that's been presented that someone is seeking to respond to. And that's what we do as ministers. Sometimes it's helpful just to remember that the New Testament itself is full of practical theology. Paul writes occasional letters. You've learned this in Critical Introduction to the New Testament, that there's a dilemma going on in the church in Corinth. So Paul picks up a pen and begins to write, as it were, a response. He's sorting out what has happened and why is it happening, and he's responding theologically and emotionally and relationally to bring about a healthy response to the church in Corinth. The same could be said for Galatia or the Philippian church, and on it goes throughout the New Testament canon. The Gospels themselves are occasional or contextual documents for their contexts. So this practice that we're thinking about is very deeply embedded within the tradition and what we're learning, seeking to learn to do well as ministers of the gospel. So back to Laurie, I got sidetracked there. He has a little chapter in his book called A New Way to Do Theology. I'm asking you to read it. He's has his own method that reflects in some broad way what you've already learned from Osmer, where he will talk about some experience and how you explore that and how you deepen your reflection about that finally moves to action. So I'm inviting you to do that, and there's a discussion question this week for you to respond to as you reflect about a theological method and how we need to avoid creating a gap or a distance between action on one hand and reflection on the other. And Laurie does a good job of raising that, I think, in his chapter. The second piece of the work this week is for you to practice this with two of your colleagues. I'm dividing you all up into groups of 3. You'll have 2 of your colleagues' case studies to read, and what you're looking at when you look at their case study is an attempt to describe what is happening in a particular ministry situation. How well did they do that? Have they presented that in a clear way that can be understood? Your response to them is to help them make sure that it is clear and begin to ask the questions about why is this happening? What's behind the scenes? What might be needed to be explored to understand the why of it all? And then thirdly, to begin to raise for your colleagues, what are the theological implications? What are the social science resources that might help provide a good redemptive response to the dilemma that has been presented? We're not going to worry about the specific actions right now, but you're working with your colleague, and the little assignment this week is to start working on those early questions of what and why and what ought, to be able to help us develop our skills in being good practitioner ministers, to be good reflective theologians as we engage in the dilemmas that ministry presents. So I hope you have fun with this week and look forward to the discussion that emerges.